With me now, Miles Himmel. He's a reporter for KFMB AM 760. Miles, it just gets more and more intriguing as more people take the stand and more of the story comes out. But I was fascinated by the 911 call because the 911 call that Adam Ashleigh meant ostensibly after he spotted Rebecca Zahau's body hanging, bound and gagged and naked. I imagined that it would be a terrified voice, a flustered voice, and I wanted to hear how it played in court. So before I ask you a question about it, let's actually hear what it was like on that phone call.
Okay, no problem. She's 30. Last time I saw her was last night, okay? Okay. All right. Okay, there's kind of lights and sirens, okay? Did she have any type of pulse when you brought her down?
Do I have any what?
Did she have a pulse when you cut her down?
Yeah, just put your hands on her back.
They were, okay. Okay. Listen to me, the paramedics are coming, okay? You got her on the ground?
Yeah,
Okay, was there anything in her mouth?
yeah.
What was in her mouth?
Some kind of gag in her mouth.
Okay, you took it out?
Miles, that sounds like somebody who's pretty traumatized by what he's seeing. It doesn't necessarily sound like a murderer who's faking it. Although, listen, I've been mystified before by people's demeanor in court. What did it seem like, his demeanor on the stand? What did he seem like in court?
Yeah, it was a wild day yesterday, Ashley. So here's how it started. Let me put you there. The Zahau family attorney, Keith Greer, first question, he said, "I'm going to start with an easy one, Adam. Tell me your age." And he looked right back at him and he said, "They're all easy." And then he told him his age. And we said, okay, here we go. We're off in this. And so he was very confident. He was well rehearsed. You know, I mean, the Ashleigh attorney and their side had him very well rehearsed, and he knew what he was talking about throughout that. So there were no, out of left field questions, no answers that got him mad. He was very well rehearsed and disciplined. That 911 call, the question that remains on the Zahau family side is, was he performing CPR during it? Because if you listen, they had an audio expert listen to it and say he always had the phone up to his mouth, which would mean you wouldn't be giving CPR with the phone to your mouth, so you would put it to the side, but never once did he put that to the side. So that's a question that's still remaining.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. In fact, on the stand, he talked about getting a table and placing the table under her hanging body and getting up on the table and using a knife to cut down her body and then actually perform CPR. So let's play that, actually, and you can actually hear him grunting, but I think you're right. If you listen with two different kinds of perspectives, you might hear something different. Have a listen.
I cut her down, I had her in one arm and cut with the other.
Okay, so what are you doing now?
If I had to speculate, I'd say it's probably sound me cutting her down and at some point jumping off the table with her.
So it was a little tricky to hear it, but there's definitely some of that, the grunting that they played, a little clip, and then said to him on the stand, "So what are you doing? What are you doing now?" But are they really getting to that aspect of it, or are they getting more to all the forensics of it? Are they drilling him on all the forensics of it?
It's a little of both because, right, we talked about it last week, that there's no DNA. They've already done the DNA expert. There's no DNA of Adam Ashleigh on Rebecca, in the room, anywhere in this. So you go, oh, okay, well, then he must not have been there. But you go, hold on, there's no DNA when he says by his own admission, he's cutting the rope down, he's performing CPR. I mean, anybody you would do that to, there would be DNA all over the place, especially when you run in and see a body hanging there. So that's certainly been a focal point as well. And then those knots that you talked about, those nautical knots, that was a big, I mean, they spent a couple hours on that yesterday going over his time, Keith Greer, the Zahau attorney, as well as the Ashleigh attorney.
And again, to remind our viewers, the knots are critical here because Adam Ashleigh's profession is tugboat pilot. Some say captain. He says pilot, and he's the head of the tugboat, and one would think you'd know a lot about nautical knots if you work on a tugboat. And he testified about how much difficulty he had getting his hands under the ropes to get a pulse, and that he may have actually loosened the ropes when he did it. This after saying that he was unaware of any of those specialized nautical knots the family alleges that only a tugboat captain or somebody with that kind of knowledge would know how to tie. Here he is. Listen to him.
You tried to put your hands in, but the ropes were so tight you couldn't easily get your hands in to test her pulse, correct?
That is correct.
So then you loosened the ropes around her wrist.
I really didn't loosen the ropes. I just tried to sort of pry under them at the time, talking to the police. That is what I had. That was my best description at the time.
So, Miles, it's critical as well to know what his behavior was after allegedly discovering the body. He went to the police station, he gave an interview, he gave his fingerprints, and had no lawyer. Was he able to really sort of hammer that down in front of the jury, or were they able to poke holes in any of his behavior after the fact?
He's been pretty transparent and say, hey, listen, I haven't done anything wrong. I was with everybody. I went there. I answered all the questions. I immediately called 911. So, like I said, he was pretty well rehearsed. I just want to go back to the knots there, Ashleigh. You know, that was a very interesting point yesterday, because he even said that he tried to loosen them because they were tight knots. And when they had that FBI person come in and show, hey, look at this is how Rebecca could have tied herself and then bound herself behind her back, they were very loose. And she did it, but they were loose knots, and said, hey, look, you can make them loose like this. And so you're going, well, if they're tight like that, you couldn't do that. You couldn't put yourself behind the back. They would have to be loose because they'd be behind your back. So that was a very interesting point.